As attorneys prepare for the trial of Jeffrey Epstein's close associate and former girlfriend, Ghislaine Maxwell, the reporter who brought the case to national attention is revealing details of her groundbreaking investigation. Miami Herald investigative reporter Julie K. Brown is out with a new book called Perversion of Justice, the Jeffrey Epstein story. It takes readers through her more than 2-year investigation into Epstein's alleged underage sex trafficking scheme. We'll talk with her first on CBS This Morning in just a moment. But first, Mola Lenghi shows us how the impact of Brown's reporting is still being felt today.
The paper's bombshell report.
It is disturbing.
This is some journalism.
It's the story that ignited a firestorm. In 2018, Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown published the series Perversion of Justice. It detailed a secret plea deal over sexual abuse allegations Jeffrey Epstein struck with federal prosecutors in South Florida nearly a decade earlier. Then U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta negotiated the plea deal with Epstein's attorneys that required the former investment banker to register as a sex offender and serve 13 months in a Florida county jail. He could have faced life in prison.
He just laid down in his towel.
Brown's series chronicled the suffering of just some of the dozens of alleged victims lured into what prosecutors call Epstein's sex trafficking scheme.
He needs to be behind bars. He needs to be behind bars for the rest of his life.
Brown's reports and interviews with victims had a big impact, prompting a new investigation.
Billionaire businessman Jeffrey Epstein was arrested on federal charges related to sex trafficking.
Labor Secretary Alex Acosta says he will now resign because of the controversy surrounding the plea deal he worked out with Jeffrey Epstein.
I'm not going into any aspects of how our investigation originated. I will say that we were assisted from some excellent investigative journalism.
After just over a month in prison, authorities say Jeffrey Epstein died by suicide in his Manhattan jail cell.
For all of the Epstein victims, it's going to take a long time to really get their minds around this.
Any co-conspirators should not rest easy.
One of those alleged co-conspirators is Epstein's close friend and associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's being held in Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, accused of recruiting and helping the disgraced financier sexually abuse underage girls, charges she denies. Maxwell faces trial in November, giving Epstein's alleged victims another chance for their day in court.
It would have been great to look at him in court and say, you know, you hurt me, you took away my innocence, you took away my youth. I'm really hoping we get to do this with Ghislaine.
Julie K. Brown joins us now for an interview you'll see first on CBS This Morning. Julie, good morning. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I want to ask you first about that 2008 plea deal, which gave immunity to any potential accomplices of Jeffrey Epstein. It did not name Ghislaine Maxwell, but she is now contending in court that charges should be dropped because of that. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, she was an integral part of his life, whether you want to say she committed any crimes or not. She was his right-hand person for a very long time during when we know that these crimes happened. So it's going to be hard, I think, for them to convince anyone that she wasn't involved. The plea deal itself, as you mentioned, didn't name her, but she's going to, you know, the wording of the plea deal said co-conspirators named and unnamed, which is something that I talked to legal experts about, and they say this is not done. Yeah. Why would you do that? You usually make a plea bargain like this when the defendant has something of value to offer prosecutors, and we have found no evidence that he gave anything to prosecutors in return.
Some documents were released last week, but we still don't have the basic documents of the FBI case, do we?
No. There's, you know, one of the underlying pieces of this story is how much is still secret, how many things are still sealed, how many things are redacted, how much information, even involving his death. There is so much we don't know. And as long as we don't have these kinds of information, there's always going to be conspiracy theories, number one. And number two, I mean, it's way really to keep people silent because they're afraid, and it's a mechanism to hide the truth, I think.
You know, it's interesting. You write that a lot of big names were friendly with Epstein, but you also say that they tell you that they knew nothing about his illegal contact with women. A lot of people will find that hard to believe. What is your reporting uncovered?
Well, you know, Epstein had a whole ecosystem of people. He did not do this crime in isolation. There were a lot of people around him during this time, whether it was through social circles or were in his inner circle, so to speak. I think that there are a lot of questions about these people who, you know, they rode on his plane, for example. You know, everyone from the butler who answered the door to the, you know, the schedulers and ultimately to the people who were involved. It's such a wide web, and I think that it needs to be examined a little closer.
What is the message? You talk about this wide web, the plea deal, all of this. What is the message to other victims, not even just in the Epstein case, alleged victims, about the power structure that's set up to protect somebody who has money and who has the resources like this?
Well, what it says is that vulnerable people are going to continue to be reluctant to come forward. And other people surrounding those like Epstein are also, as long as they are silent, as long as everybody keeps their mouth shut, then it does more to bury the truth, and it also makes it more unlikely that other victims are going to come forward.
And does it give his victims any chance of closure when there is this out there still, that there is this larger issue looming?
Well, his victims are still angry.
Yeah.
They're very angry. They really haven't had their justice, you know.
They feel like he escaped by his own death.
He did, and even though Maxwell has been charged, and I have information, my reporting shows that there were other powerful people that were involved in this. Just the two of them did not do this. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we hope that authorities are examining every tie that Epstein had and put together exactly how he managed to do this for so long. I mean, it was a long time.
Julie, you have a chapter in your book titled "Jeffrey Epstein Didn't Kill Himself." Now I know some of the lawyers for some of the victims who believe he did kill himself. What evidence do you have that he didn't?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that there's, again, too much has been hidden. You know, the cameras weren't working. Yes. The guards were asleep.
There are a lot of coincidences.
You know, his cellmate was taken out the night before. I mean, and he shouldn't have been left alone. He was just released from suicide watch. So as long as they keep the investigation itself secret, as long as they do not release the details, I think there's going to be always a question about this. And by the way, he was a kind of man who didn't do anything alone. I mean, he had butlers to practically tie his shoelaces. The idea that he could have the wherewithal to break 3 bones in his neck by himself is just, I think, incredulous to me.
Before we go, in 30 seconds, I mean,
Sure.
One of the things that I'm fascinated by, the victims who've come forward and spoken to you, could this have happened without the Me Too movement?
Yeah, I think it could have. You know, I was working on this before the Me Too movement. I think that it helped that this happened in the middle of my investigation. But they really didn't feel, the victims in this case didn't feel like they were like the Me Too. The Me Too movement, remember, was about a lot of famous people that came forward with Weinstein. So
different situations, certainly.
Right.
These young girls, as you pointed out, that were the ones no one was going to listen to in the first place. Julie, it's a fascinating book and a story that people continue to follow. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And don't forget that Perversion of Justice is on sale now.